Are Christians the bigger obstacle to the spread of the gospel? And what do you do with personal objections? Well, if you're asking these questions, stick around for the rest of the podcast. Welcome to SAFT Podcast. And if this is your first time listening or watching the podcast, stay subscribed. We have got some great content rolling out for you. And today I am joined by the one and only Mary Jo Sharp. Mary Jo, welcome to SAFT Podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
So, Mary Jo Sharp is an assistant professor of apologetics at Houston Baptist University and the founder and director of Confident Christianity Apologetics Ministry. She has authored Why Do You Believe That? Living in Truth, Defending the Faith, Resilient Faith, and has contributed to books such as Come, Let Us Reason, In Defense of the Bible, and A New Kind of Apologist. Her latest book is titled Why I Still Believe. Now, it can be said hands down that she is one of the most sought after Christian apologists and a beacon of encouragement for women apologists. You also have a new podcast titled The Pastor and the Professor. Can you tell us a bit more about the podcast?
Yeah, so it's sort of a vodcast because we're doing videos, but it's my husband who has been a pastor for many years, and myself who's been a professor. I've been a professor for many years, and so we decided to get together and share our various expertise, and also to share what it looks like as far as a married couple who both do ministry, and we do separate ministries, but then we also engage each other's. So we talk about apologetics, theology, spiritual formation, marriage. We just kind of cover faith and life and have a good time doing it.
So it's a whole package for anyone wanting to dive into a podcast.
Yeah, and it's we do it on Patreon. So some of it is available on my YouTube channel, Mary Jo Sharp. Just look for the Pastor and Professor. And then if you want to go further into the conversations, that's on our Patreon channel, the Pastor and the Professor.
All right, so I'll be dropping a link to the podcast and the YouTube channel and all the books in the description for anyone who would like to dive in. So Mary Jo Sharp, you have a journey from being a non-Christian to being a Christian, and that's something that you sort of explore more in the book, Why I Still Believe. So how was that background? Like, you were brought up in a completely non-Christian family or a nominal namesake Christian family? How was that background?
So my family had stopped going to church when I was very young, too young to remember church. And so they themselves, like my parents had Christian upbringings in the church, but I did not have an upbringing in the church. And that wasn't something that we would discuss, or, we wouldn't read the Bible together. There was no mention of that. But what I did have was two parents who really much loved the arts and the sciences, and taught me to appreciate the beauty of nature and to be sort of in awe and wonder at the universe in which we lived. And that those influences on my life eventually caused me to wonder what all of this beauty and all of this goodness and all this truth I was seeing in the world, what was that all for? It caused me to wonder about that. And so though I did not grow up with a Christian home, and I grew up in a part of the country that was a part of the United States that is more post-Christian than
Right.
some of the other parts. So like we didn't have there's a cultural sort of Christianity that I experienced in the Southern United States. That wasn't my experience in the Pacific Northwest. So I thought religion was sort of on the fringe of society. It was the fringe people. I had no idea how many people across the world were religious people, and so that was sort of my background. But I was greatly impacted by how they raised me as a lover of the arts, the sciences, and of the cosmos.
Right. So it can be said definitely that that sort of prompted you to seriously pursue this query of is there a designer or a creator behind what you were seeing around? And how was that transition from being a non-Christian towards identifying yourself as a Christian? Was it a long brewing process, or was it something a bit faster than you realized?
So it was a brewing process. There, it was a long time. Um, I had these questions as I was becoming an older teenager, and there was a music teacher in my school, in the end of my high school years, who he very much was burdened. He was a Christian who was burdened for me, And he had never really shared his faith with anyone before. And he was a little bit nervous about doing so with a public school student. So, but he felt so burdened that my senior year of high school, so the last year, he gave me a Bible and said, when you go off to college, you're going to have hard questions. I hope you'll turn to this. And that's what I did. I very much respected him. I ended up getting a university degree in music education. And so I started reading that Bible, and it really brought me around to thinking there was probably a God, and so I needed to check that out. So when I went off to the university, well, I did the opposite of what we're usually worried about with students in America, is that we feel like Christians are going to be sent off to the university and lose their faith. And I went off to the university to explore faith for the first
Wow.
time, and that's what I did. I explored faith. I went to church on my own, and eventually I found a church where I heard the good news of Jesus. I heard the gospel, and it made sense. And it was sort of the end of a long journey, and I trusted in Jesus for my salvation.
Right. And I recall Dr. Craig talking about his journey, and he recalling about how one warm evening sky he stepped out, and that was after like a long time of wrestling with this question, and he steps out and he looks at the sky and he goes, "Wow, God does exist," and he just comes into this aha moment, and he says, "Oh yes, there is a God," and he has this encounter with God at that moment. That sort of that expression out there. Uh, did you have something of that specificness in that journey? Is there something that you recall looking back? Maybe not as vibrant as Dr. Craig's, but something along that line?
I love Dr. Craig's testimony. Mine was a little, mine was more of when a pastor finally told me, like he asked me these two questions, which were from a evangelism program called Evangelism Explosion. And he said, if you were to die tonight and you were to go to heaven and, like stand before God, and he were to say, why should I let you into my heaven? I was like, oh, well, he shouldn't, because I haven't trusted his son. For me, it was very logical. Like, I understand that I need to trust Jesus for salvation. And if I don't do that, then I'm not going to be in heaven with him. So mine was more of a, yes, I'm ready to do that now. It was, my husband was the one who was more emotionally impacted. And he calls himself a backslidden Christian. I was married at the time, young married. And he said he was in tears. He was crying because he had watched, me come to faith, and he felt like he hadn't been as influential in that. But so for me, it was very much this makes sense. This is the right thing to do. This answers the questions. This checks the box. And I want to trust Jesus for my salvation.
Right. Yeah. So definitely we can start to see that sort of that mixture in the pastor and the professor podcast also, this sort of combo that you have going there, extending into the podcast as well. And so in your book, Why I Still Believe, in the title itself, you mentioned about how Christianity is, it sort of transcends what Christians often behave, and how the Christian message is, it has to be looked at in its own context of in its own veracity, of whether it holds up, and not primarily restricted to how Christians behave. And that's something that I just want to try and explore. And I believe this is something that connects to all of the audience. Like, either we behave in such manners, or we have seen Christians who take a step back because of that sort of that interaction, or we have seen others do that, and we ourselves have sort of felt sort of some sort of uncomfortability. And you recall that when you, on one of the first days that you came to church, you had a sort of a disappointing encounter with one of the person who greeted you into the church. Do you recall? Can you recall that for us? How that experience was?
Yeah, that was a disappointing experience. I was so excited about coming into the church because, like I said, it made sense to me, and all this truth, goodness, and beauty that I had found in the world. The Bible was explaining, why it was explaining what was behind all of that, the creator behind all that. So I was excited to find these people who were seeking that truth, goodness, and beauty. And my first day to come into the church, I was very nervous because I didn't know anything about this culture I was entering into, which was a Southern evangelical church. And I didn't know how to act. I didn't know what to wear. So my husband helped me pick something out because he was, born and raised in this environment, this sort of church environment. So we're walking into the church, and the pastor who had led me to the Lord, his wife was the one that was greeting people. And she's standing at the door to the sanctuary, smiling and, giving everybody a, how are you? How's your family? And we walk up and she looks at me and her smile just drops. And she gives me the once up and down and she says, "Oh, honey, we need to find you better clothes." And that's not what I was expecting. I was expecting something like, "Wow, I heard you accepted Christ and I'm so excited to have you." And I mean, this is one of those kind of churches where I'm just about to go into the service and at the end of service, walk up in front of everybody and profess publicly my belief in Christ. And the first thing I'm told is I'm not dressed appropriately. And
Right.
it can seem kind of simplistic, why do you care so much? But it was just one example, like from the very beginning of my entrance into the Christian faith. It's an example of how Christians were always focused on the wrong things.
Right.
And not maybe always is hyperbolic, but there was a lot of focusing on the wrong stuff and missed opportunities to be redemptive and loving. And this really, put a seed in my life of doubt about the people who said they believed in God.
Right. And it leaves me to wonder because, I mean, you are not definitely walking in with something too explicit to leave the entire crowd aghast or anything. And this was something more of her taste of dress. I mean, she might have preferred a different style and that's it. But it leaves me to wonder, is that because in our churches we have sort of relegated the task of, bringing people to Christ and pastoring them to a group of individuals, to pastors, leaders, worship bands, that's their job. They'll do all of that. And we've thought, some of us will just sit back and we'll just go there and attend. So we've just sort of given us the impression that, hey, you know what? So now I can look at and make these sort of comments without thinking of any repercussion, without of thinking that I have to hold myself up to a standard to impact others because the leaders will impact. I'll just be there and attend. That's the thought that's coming to my mind. What do you think what is happening here? I mean, what causes people to behave in such manner?
That's actually a really great thought. And that's something that I had to struggle with as I was, working through my own doubt. But I think part of it is you're hitting on it, is that people think that bringing people to Christ is the role of the pastor, or people who they'll say like they have the gift of evangelism. I don't. But the Bible really calls all of us to minister to others, and it really calls all of us to be making disciples. And so that's, the Matthew passage, the Great Commission. So we're all responsible to grow in our faith and to trust God in this process of witnessing to people. And, we're all supposed to be people who are showing the love of God to the world, the redemption, the salvation that he has offered to us. And we're supposed to be showing to the rest of the world. And that's for every single believer. And why, you asked, the second part was like, well, why are people not doing this? And I think part of it goes back to our discipleship in the churches. What are we doing to train people up to become more Christ-like on that path, that Ephesians 4 path, where Paul is talking about, hey, we've got apostles and teachers and evangelists. We've got all these people around us, and the purpose of them is to grow us in Christ, to grow us in maturity, so that we're not just tossed around by culture.
Right.
So what you're seeing with the dress kind of thing is, it wasn't real showy. You can tell I'm from Portland, Oregon. I'm a grunger, not showy. And so it was, she was letting the culture sort of throw her around of her expectations rather than focusing on Christ and this baby believer in Christ. So I think a lot of it has to do with discipleship and spiritual formation, taking very seriously to grow in our relationship with God, who has personhood. So he's not some abstract object that we think about. He's a person we have a relationship with.
Right. And for us also, we both ponder what can we do to bring about a change, because even here we also see this different aspect of something that can immediately become a personal objection for people. Because here we see in the youth camps that we have in UAE, parents just standing back and looking at how long the beard of a guy is and then trying to judge his holiness based on that. And this may be people who are, and most often these are people who are non-believers. They come to this camp for the very first time because their Christian friends invite. And the immediate thought amongst people around is, well, how do they look on the outside, and much less on have they really taken a step forward to the faith? Have they taken a move forward? Should I uphold them in prayer? What do you think we can do to remove these sort of cultural mold, because this can contribute to being a major uh, contributor towards personal objections that people can have against Christianity?
Yeah. So I think one of the things we need to do is we need to focus on learning our Christianity. So take the
Yeah.
focus off of the cultural aspects that are going to change from culture to culture. And when you have a country like ours, which is America, which is so big, you have many cultures within the borders of just our larger American culture. So the focus can't be specifically on, how we dress or these traditions that are time and culture based. We need to help our people see the eternal truths of our Lord and the things that he set up. Like he said, when he was asked about the greatest, Jesus has asked about, what's the greatest commandment? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength,
Hmm.
and love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and then he even fleshes this out in the Sermon on the Mount in Luke 6 when he said, so how do you love your neighbor as yourself? Like, what does that look like? He said, do unto others as you want them to do unto you. So
Hmm.
there
Hmm.
it is. Like, you don't want to be judged for what you're wearing, right? Maybe you're having a bad hair day or you chose the beard one. I have not heard the beard one, but maybe your beard is shorter. So you don't want to be judged on that, right? So don't judge others. Maybe when you get your longer beard, you just don't want to judge other people for where they're at, right? Because you don't want that brought back to you. So he's telling us, here's the problem, right? You're looking at you're pointing out somebody's speck in their eye when you have a log in your
Hmm.
own eye. We're actually taught that if we believe God is real, if we believe Jesus's teachings are true, we actually have to abide by these kind of don't be a hypocrite. Don't start pointing out in other people their small sin, their small vices when you struggle with that personally and quite largely, right? That's what he's saying. But I think that's important. Help our people be authentic is what we're saying. And we're going to mess up, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
everything I'm telling you is like, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could all do that perfectly? But we don't. So basically, if you do treat somebody in a manner that you wouldn't want to be treated, then admit it. Tell them you're sorry. Ask forgiveness. This is how we can help if we talk about this, we train our congregation to be like this as leaders. If we're like this and we model it for our congregations, then we can help them become, more Christ-like, help them move on that journey towards Christ-likeness.
Yeah, because the immediate ramification that I can see is that we put so much of our energy in discerning and using the judgment skills onto these very minor non-salvific parts, and we end up not being able to discern where doctrine creeps in, where heresy creeps in the form of doctrine. I see this in churches around me, where modalism sneaks in under the guise of Trinity, and people are fine with it because they are not able to discern it, but they're able to discern how people dress and how people look, and that seems to be, what concerns salvation for people. And one very real example that I got to know, I think about the past couple of months, is that one of my friends that I know, he was baptized a year earlier, and now he's no longer a Christian. He's a deist. And he told me that his personal objection to Christianity is, he has mentioned many other intellectual objections, some problems of contradiction in the Bible and all of that. But his personal objection to Christianity is that his parents are not supportive of different styles of music. And I was left speechless that he thought that is sort of supposed to be an objection to the Christian faith. I mean, he can say that's an objection to the church or the style of Christian upbringing, but he takes that as his personal objection. Explicitly, he said that that's his personal objection to Christianity. And you are an apologetics professor. You deal with a lot of people. You engage with an audience. Have you come across anything of that sort where people take something that is absolutely irrelevant to what Christianity says and then end up thinking that Christianity hinges on that?
Yeah, definitely. What I've heard is it's along those same lines of what you're saying, but I've heard people say, well, if I've asked them if they go to church, they'll say, no, I don't go to church because it's full of hypocrites. And so they don't give a specific example like what you've got there, but it's more of the generalization. And one of the things that I tell people is that, well, the behaviors of Christians cannot be the litmus test for the truth of Christianity. Right? That's actually not the litmus test for the truth of any belief system at all, any philosophical framework. So that's the problem, is that people are going to behave poorly even when they profess a standard of goodness that they're supposed to be shooting for, or their God as their basis for their morality. They're still, because of their sinful nature, they're still going to fail to live up to that. But does that then disprove the objective truth of Christianity? And in the instance of the music, that's a minor issue. Maybe there's something that needs to happen there. I don't know. But it's not the litmus test for whether or not Christianity is objectively true, whether Jesus actually rose from the dead 2,000 years ago, these kinds of things, whether God is the creator of the universe. It doesn't cover any of that. It's a subjective sort of experience that is causing doubt.
But that also seems to be this major force of personal objection. But intellectual objections, you can bring into a place, you can dissect it on the table of logic and all of that. But personal objections always take up these cultural, like you said, the subjective elements into it, and becomes very hard to, because if I'm not from that culture, then it becomes very hard for me to engage with it. But intellectual objections, you can get past that cultural language barriers and get beyond that. And the other thing that I see with intellectual objections is that even if you get past, the other thing that I see with personal objections is that even if you get past these intellectual objections and you say, yes, God exists, you have a dislike, a hatred towards God. You have a dislike towards church. So you may say that, yes, God does exist, like we see in James, even the demons believe that he does exist and tremble. It's sort of that, yeah, fine, he exists, so what? I would rather have hell than heaven with this God, because I don't want to be in this church. I don't want to be with Christians. And that I see as very detrimental to the progression of the gospel, with sharing the gospel, with evangelizing, because we are doing all that we can to present the gospel in the best way. We're getting past, we're doing all the hard work. We are trusting in the Spirit is moving. But this person's objection is against what other Christians have done, what other Christians have done towards them. So in that sort of an engagement, when their objection is primarily, personal and not too intellectual, what would you suggest that those of all of us who would engage in that evangelism process with that person don't do? I mean, do's and don'ts, there's a lot to cover, but what do you suggest that we don't do in those instances?
Well, it's probably not a good idea to go after any of those subjective areas, right? Just to say, well, I think one of the mistakes that Christians have made is they've tried to hold people accountable to Christian ethics and then the outworkings of Christian ethics before helping that person see the objective truth of Christianity. Right. So I think there's a misstep there if you're trying to hold somebody accountable to like a Christian ethical structure before you're ministering to them right where they're at and showing them, here's what I would say do. So that's sort of the don't. The do would be that the thing about the Christian philosophical framework is it establishes a lot of things that people do believe in, and even when they say, I don't really like God. I'm not sure that when they say they don't really like God, or that they don't like that concept, that they've fully formed that view, that they've fully explored that, because a lot of the things they do believe in, like hope, goodness, that there are things that are wrong, there's justice and injustice. A lot of these concepts find their home, they find their grounding in a Christian philosophical framework. But if you were to remove that basis, then those things that they want, that they desire to have in their life, is all of a sudden gone or groundless. You can have them, but only subjectively or only relativistically. So there's no ultimate grounding for that. And so I think that's, kind of moving people back towards, well, what is it that you do care about? And then how do you know that those things matter? And those are the kinds of objections, that's handling the objections the way that I might go about it with a person who has a poor subjective experience or, a part of their narrative is just a bad experience with the church. Well, then I'd want to move that back to, well, what is it that you care about? I care about those things too. I'd want to agree with them on those and then move them into where do we find a home for those ideas?
Right. I mean, we both agree that we should keep how people misuse a philosophy away from what the philosophy itself says, and how we should focus on the truth of Christianity. But there is this element of when people look at a church and they see the leadership fail, when they see the leadership fail morally. I mean, right now we are in a whole ruckus of it. There is that inner concern of people saying, well, how do I trust the leadership? I mean, how do I trust this pastor to be the sort of a leader, a sort of an encouragement for me, if I know that he too is equally vulnerable to go down the slope immediately any moment? Uh, what do we respond to that? How do we encourage them? Like, we can't say to them, don't go to any church, sit at home, read the Bible, focus with God. That is not an ideal option. But what would be your ideal suggestion?
Yeah, this is a tough one. This is kind of a big question, right? Um, One of the things that I recently posted on about this issue is that we need to remember that trust in of itself is actually a good thing. And that as Christians, it's good that we want to trust people and view them as innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
That's actually a redemptive attitude. And nobody should feel bad if they have trusted in someone, that person has let them down, because that was a good thing that you were doing. So I do want to say that at the start, because I've been hurt over and over by church experiences and by human failings in leadership in the church, especially being married to a pastor. And so I had a propensity to want to, like a desire to want to not trust people ever again and protect myself. So I would wall up into just philosophy and the just thinking about Christianity. But we're made for community. God himself, the Trinity, is community. And so he made us in his image, and we're made for that community. So one of the things you need to do is be wise about who you're sharing your community with.
Right.
Are these people who, when they're caught in a lie, when they do something wrong, they will ask for forgiveness? Or are they people who will question you for questioning them?
Right.
You know, when you see that, that's sort of a warning sign that this is not a good situation, and this is not a person that you should be following. Good leaders do admit where they're wrong. Good leaders tell you that they will fail you, because there's none that are good, right? Jesus said, no one is good but God alone. And that's what a good leader will point you to, is that I'm going to fail you at some point in some way. But I'm trying, and I'm trying, and I will try to admit where I'm wrong. If you don't have a leader that's doing that, that's a good indicator that you shouldn't place your trust there, that maybe you should move along. But ultimately, remember, only Jesus is worthy of your full, unconditional trust, where you just really wildly abandon yourself to him. No human has that.
Yeah. Now, we just talked about what a person should do if they sort of perceive the sort of impending failure that can happen with the leader. But what if someone that's listening into the podcast and they're like, yeah, the arguments for God make sense and all of that, but they say, hey, I have already had a bad experience with the church and the leadership. I'm fine with saying God exists, but I've had a bad experience. What step would you suggest them to take? I mean, they already have this background experience of a distaste with Christians. What can we do to help them out to further in their growth in faith?
Yeah. Again, these are very hard, broad questions. I just want to make sure people understand we don't have like a 5-step program to get you back. But what I would say is that you do, and I don't mean this tritely, you do need to pray. You do really need to focus on your relationship with God and start reconstructing that relationship. Because what happened to me was, as I began to distrust people in the church, I transferred that over to distrust of God. Because again, God has personhood, so
Right.
so I began to distrust him as a person. So make sure, first of all, that you're going back to putting your trust in God, at seeking for his guidance, asking him, what should I do with this situation that I'm in? And let him minister to you. I mean, even Jesus pulls away from people to allow God to pour back into him, to build him back up, to minister to him, to engage in community. But then remember that at some point, if you've had to pull away from a church because you've been hurt, or you've been in an abusive situation, which is not a bad thing to leave, right? So you need to get away from that. But at some point, you need that community of believers, because they help you. They are there to encourage you and to love you, and they're to hold you accountable, so that you don't just go off on crazy ideas as well. So that's what the cloud of witnesses is for, is they're there to be our community and to hold us accountable too. And we all need that. So maybe start attending churches again, or going, asking friends where they go or something to get you back. Try somewhere else, because it's important to have that community. So that's kind of what I do
Hmm.
and expect that people are going to fail you
Right.
wherever you go. You're not going to find any perfect place where everybody's got it together.
And we just came back to the point where we said about how church attendees would like to relegate some of the responsibility towards the leadership and then sit back. But I think this brings to light about how the entire church, all of the attendees, has to take that responsibility. And maybe they have a problem with the leadership, but maybe we can be there. We can help them fellowship and help them walk slowly back into the church. And with leadership, maybe they not see the private life of person. Maybe they don't get to know the pastor in person. But as a church attendee, they have that freedom to get to know you and then build a more robust trust in the person that you are engaging with, and hopefully that can help the believer walk back into the church and embrace and be part of the church community. And as we come to this conclusion of this, I would say this very relevant talk that we're talking about, all these personal objections that Christians face, and we are really delighted to have you, Mary Jo, here with us. You have an experience to tell about how two individuals, David Wood and the late Nabil Qureshi, played a critical role in being a beacon of support and encouragement. In fact, in enabling you to sort of break away from the stereotypical pastor's wife role into being the person that you are, bringing the influence and being a force of change in the world of Christian apologetics. What role did they play, and can you share that experience with us?
Yeah, they are two, Nabil and David are two very big personalities, the late Nabil Qureshi. So I met them in my graduate program in apologetics. And the thing that was very influential for me was I was going through a time of doubt, based first in emotional doubt and experiences with the church. And then secondly, that had moved into intellectual doubt. So I was at this university to find some answers. And when I met David and Nabil, they were actively engaging in debates with Muslims and Christians. And I found that fascinating, that they would be willing to do that. They would be willing to put their faith out publicly like that, which is something that I did not grow up with. Right. In my culture, religion's very private. So I was just very interested in them. And what I found from both of them was, as I expressed my interest, which was really just, hey, can I review one of your debates? Like, can I send you a review? As I did that, they started to see that, or at least they made me feel like my work had value, that my intellectual side, that my desire and thirst and hunger for the knowledge of God was an important part of who I was. They validated that, and they encouraged it in me. And so they brought me on board, helping them with debates. And then eventually they kind of pushed me into my own first debate, public debate. So they were very important for me, in that they taught me a couple of things. One is that it's okay to be a public Christian. Two is that I had been very much focused on myself. And here were these two guys that were just serving other people sort of unashamedly and just with all that they had. And so it caused me to reflect on, why am I so focused on myself instead of really serving the church and serving my fellow mankind by, making my faith public and putting it out into the public realm. So they did that for me. And then they really were the first people I encountered that just understood me for who I was as a Christian, that I was an intellectual, academic type Christian. And they valued that greatly and utilized me for that trait. And it was just a big turn in my life. In fact, they were the two that really brought me into ministry. And when I meet them, that's right around the time that I begin my own apologetics ministry.
Wow. And I'm right now, it's come to my memory, the St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland. I read one of his prayers that he mentioned, where he says, one of the lines is, Christ in the mouth of people who see me, and Christ in the eyes of people who see me. And I just hope that we as Christians would be able to be that force of change, where others would want to encounter Christianity because of seeing us, that maybe we can offset the bad experience others have and live out the greatest apologetic, that is love and our life. So thank you so much, Mary Jo, for being on the SAF podcast, and we hope that you had a great experience with us.
Oh, I did. Thank you so much for having me. This is so enjoyable.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next podcast. Take care and God bless.